There were a lot of questions, and the one that came my way is about Azalea. How to maintain and how to care and how to style Azalea Bonsai. First of all, congratulations to Bonsai Empire. 20 years Bonsai Online. Oscar, you did a great job, and I think it's unbelievable how you connect the bonsai world from all over this planet by your platform. Congratulations, and I hope to celebrate 50 years of Bonsai Empire as well. There were a lot of questions, and the one that came my way is about Azalea. How to maintain and how to care and how to style Azalea Bonsai. Which is nice, and I'm really happy to answer that question. I think it's important to know that Azalea is not a tree, and most of the time with bonsai we work with tree species. Azalea is a shrub, and a special one because it originated from the mountains. We all know many azaleas that look like big, beautiful trees in open land, but the species originated from the mountains. So that's one thing to know. Another thing to take in mind is that Azalea has a very special cyclus, growing cyclus. And to work with Azalea is to know this cyclus. And to know that the purpose of an azalea is to bloom, to give flowers. So when we talk about the year-round maintenance, this is something to keep in mind. The third thing to mention in advance is that Azalea has a special need in its conditions of the soil. We all know that acidity is a point of attention, and the pH of an azalea soil should be around 5.5. And if you use Kanuma, the special soil from the area Kanuma in Japan, we know that the acidity of the soil, the pH value of the soil is good, around 5.2. But that's not the only thing, because soil is something you add when you repot. The quality of the water and the parameters of the water has to be correct. If you have very chalky water, you can diminish the value of the Kanuma soil within a few months. So when you work with Azalea, if you want to work with Azalea, please check the quality of your water, because that's very important. Also, the fertilizer is a point of attention. If you buy special Azalea fertilizer in a garden center that is meant to put in your garden to your azaleas, these fertilizers have a special nutrient to lower the pH value. So if you use Kanuma and you use garden center azalea fertilizer, you double the pH, which is no good. So if you use Kanuma, you can use normal fertilizer. If you use normal soil, you have to do a special fertilizer for azalea. Correct anymore, we have to talk about rhododendron. The azalea as plant name is not in use anymore. And for now we talk about rhododendron indicum, the azalea. The azalea family is quite big. We work with Thalia mollis, for example. The rhododendron indicum is the new name for the azalea. And in bonsai, of course, we quite often work with the Satsuki group, because that's a group that has the quality to thicken, to lignify on the trunk, and to have a very short growth in the internodes. If you work on the Azalea japonica, for example, you can find these in gardens quite often. Old, shrub-like, multi-trunks. They are really nice, and in the maintenance and the care and the styling, not that different from the normal Satsukis. To see how to take care, maintain and style azaleas. Here it is the 1st of December, so it's winter time. So we make a tokonoma with a cascading azalea, with the moon in the clouds. It's a pity we cannot look outside, but there is really a moon in the clouds tonight. And a small suiseki with the reflection of the trunk line of the azalea and the moonlight. This because I think we often forget the origination of the azalea. So in wintertime, there's not a lot to do on azalea, because the end buds of the azalea are the flower buds. So if you prune azalea in wintertime, you will diminish the flowers. And I won't recommend that. Of course, I know you can do it, and the idea is that azalea in spring can focus on vegetation and not on flowering. But normally when you remove the flowers early in the flowering season, you get the same effect, because the azalea normally starts to flower and then starts to grow. So in wintertime, the azalea, one thing to keep in mind is that although it originates from the mountain, the azalea is not very hardy to frost. It's not so strange, because in the mountains it will be covered by snow. So there will be a perfect pack of isolation on the very thin bark. And there's the problem. The azalea does not lower its water levels in its wood. It can't, like the deciduous trees that are common to winter times, that lower the water rate in the wood, so the tree is more resistant to frost. And the soft wood, the phloem layer, is very thin, so the cambium is really on the outside of the trunk, and that makes it very vulnerable for sun and frost and wind. So in wintertime we have to, here in Holland, we have to protect our azaleas. No direct sun when it's freezing, and when it's -3 or colder, I protect it by a cover. Here at Deshima I have a glass house, but if you don't have a glass house, just put it out of the sun in a shady place, or cover it with plastic or whatever. But not colder than -3, and no direct sun on the nebari in the trunk. I can show you many examples here in Holland where the sun during frost times damaged the nebari, and later on in the season there will be small shary parts on the trunk because of the, well, maybe you can say exploded tissue by the extension of the frost and the sun heat that makes the cells explode. So wintertime, easy time, no fertilizer, easy going, which will be fine. Then in early spring, you have to make a decision, because early spring is about repotting in bonsai. And for azaleas, we used to repot after the flowering period. Satsuki, 5th month tree, means normally the Satsuki flowers in the 5th month. Azaleas flower later and later every year for the last 15 years. So where I was used to transplant or repot the azalea after the flowering, now that will be somewhere end of June, which I think is too late to repot an azalea, because then the heat is already there, the humidity in the air is much lower, and it makes it harder for the azalea to recover. So the last 2-3 years I changed my program, changed the year cycles on the maintenance, and I repot before flowering. The idea is that repotting after flowering gives you a very elongated flowering period, because you don't give any impulse on the roots, and the roots will give impulse on the vegetation development. But I think that one is not so important when you compare it to a too late repotting in the season. So repotting just when the flower buds start to move, normally somewhere half April. Repotting on an azalea is a water, put the tree upside down, rinse, 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 and remove as much of the old soil as possible. A good azalea smells to a very special mycorrhiza type. You cannot rinse the mycorrhiza away, because we are talking about the mycorrhiza not like a pine that is on the roots, but we are talking about the mycorrhiza group that is in the roots. So you cannot rinse it, but mycorrhiza is very important to an azalea. So, but rinsing is no problem, and you won't damage the soft and brittle fiber roots when you rinse it. Get into the soil ball, especially underneath the trunk, because if you leave that for a very long time untouched, the pH will be a problem over there, and azalea needs a lot of rejuvenation on the roots. After repotting, but this is almost for every azalea year round, put it in a few hours sun a day. And then you can choose what you want. If you are still in the development phase with your azalea, it's quite common to remove the flowers right after half May, end of May, and then the tree can have 3-4 growing months and development of the ramification. Or even, if you are a phase before that, grow branches or trunk size. And then of course you don't repot it in a small bonsai container, but you put it in a wooden crate or something like that to give it its root volume and give it its growth, length, its thickness. So let it flower as long as you want. If the tree is matured and the ramification is okay, the layers are okay, then you don't prune or you don't remove the flowers very soon. You let it flower as long as you want, and then the tree will shift from not the vegetation, but the generation. I don't know the right English word. In Dutch we say generatief or vegetatief. So generative flowering, seeds, everything like that, and then you move to the vegetation. To make the shift for the tree is to remove the seed balls. After the flower has deteriorated, or when you remove the flower in early stage, you remove all of the flower, everything. If you leave the small stems, the tree will start to make seeds, and that will cost a lot of energy, and the tree won't shift to its vegetation modus. So when you remove the flowers, remove everything. And there comes an interesting point. You start fertilizing, and azalea are at the lowest end when it comes to need for fertilization. If you look at the spectrum of all bonsai, here are the pines, which need a lot of nutrients, and on the other side there are the azaleas. If you look at the AC value, so the amount of salt that can be given to the trees, pines can have as much as possible for trees, and azaleas are on the other end. So don't fertilize too much, because the AC value, the relatively salt value, will give problems, because the roots will get burned, the leaves will get burned, and azalea needs quite low rate, or at least a low AC value. So not too strong on the fertilization. If you use Biogold or Abracas, it won't be a problem, although Abracas can be quite strong, but Biogold is fine, and the liquid fertilizer is okay. But the N from the NPK shouldn't be too high for azalea. And be careful and read about the AC value of your... There are two scenarios. We all know that the flower buds will be back. Rejuvenating of the vegetation is very important on azalea, and you need to keep the tree strong. Getting back is not the point where you plan on. You plan on short sprouts with the flower bed on the end. Because next year you want your layers, you want your space between the layers, and you want your flowers on it. So by azalea you cut the layers very flat. I use like a big scissor when the ramification is okay, of course, when the horizontal layer is okay. The vertical layer I cut back even to the boldwood. I don't look at any leaves or buds or whatever. After flowering, it's just like like trimming very flat on the old wood. Then the new sprouts come, and depending on what time you remove the flowers, you can do nothing, and the sprouts will grow, and in July, August, the flower buds will be on it, and there will be a perfect height on the layer for next flowering season. Or sometimes it looks like the tree makes too long sprouts, and then you have to decide to do a second pruning. And the second pruning cannot be done too late, because then there will be no young sprouts with flower buds in it, because the tree doesn't have the time for it, or the season is at its end. So, beginning of June, you have to decide what to do, whether you give it a second cut or not. And this is an important one, because every variety in every country, in every climate environment will act different. So it's not for me to tell you when to do a second trimming or not. But the second trimming can be very important. If you don't do this, the first trimming will give sprouts like this length, flower buds will be here, and there will be no layering or open space in your tree. And then you keep on fertilizing, not a problem at all. And at the end of August, beginning of September, you switch from fertilization from an NPK like 3-2-1 to an NPK from 1-1-3. So you higher the kalium to give it a nice ending of the season, lower the end rate, and get a strong and hardy tree for the next winter. So moving with the cycles from winter rest to flowering explosion, and then the vegetation development and the new flower buds July, August, is very important to follow your tree in it. Sometimes there are problems in following that cycles, and the one here in Holland and Belgium, which is the biggest, we call in Dutch doorwas. And doorwas will say that new sprouts in the early spring will start to grow before the flower opens. And what happens is that you get vegetation around the flower bed, and the flower bed is planning to open in the 5th month. But sometimes when you have a short winter, a very warm winter, the vegetation cycles will start earlier than the flowering cycles. You can remove these small sprouts, put the tree not in a too sunny place, although in spring the tree can handle the power of the sun. It will provoke the vegetation, and you have to leave till the flowers open. And then you can decide whether you want a long growing season, or you let the flowers go up to the last one and then remove everything and get a shorter vegetation season. When you have a short vegetation season, after removing the flowers, trimming the tree will be sufficient, because then we are talking about July or maybe the end of June, and there is not so much time for the new sprouts to grow until the tree makes a new flower bed. And when the flower bed is so pruning in the right time, right after flowering, maybe a second time if the sprout starts to lengthen too much, and then leave the tree for the next season. Not in the direct sun, early morning sun will be fine. And that's about it when we talk about the year-round calendar. We've talked about repotting. Please check your water, because watering an azalea and not knowing how chalky the water is or how many minerals are in it can be a dangerous job. Use the Kanuma. Last thing we can talk about is about the styling, because azalea has this history of being styled in big nebari, thick trunks, horizontal layers, a lot of open space between the layers, because you want your flowers into the tree, not only the flowers on the tips of the branches, but also on. This is one way of styling azalea, and it is the most common way. I'm happy to see more and more other combination in landscaping, the more hardy styled landscapes with rocks and slanting styles, fukinagashi styles. And I think this is quite interesting because the origination of Azalea is from the mountains. So I hope you will enjoy thinking about how to style your Azalea, how to work with your Azalea. It's not up to me to answer all your questions by this video, of course. Maybe Bonsai Empire will be the place to gather and talk about this. And I wish you, Oscar, all the best with your superb bonsai platform, Bonsai Empire. Hope to see you soon.